Good afternoon. I am going to call to order this regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, November 20th. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Council Members Johnson, Ellison, Warsami, Schrader, Council Member Fletcher, and Gordon. Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. We have one discussion item on our agenda today, as well as our standing committee reports. And our first discussion item is a report on the work of the Arts and Creative Economy Work Group, which I was a part of, and we've been doing a lot of great work. And so I will welcome up staff for a presentation.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Walczak. Shelton, how are you?
Yes, let me. Madam Chair, Council President Bender, and committee members, my name is Danielle Shelton-Walczak. I'm the Co-Deputy City Coordinator, and I will be presenting with my colleague, Gulgun Khayyam, the insights and recommendations to align and grow our current arts capacity. Today's presentation will be divided into two sections. I will be presenting an overview of the staff direction and process that informed the insights and recommendations. Ms. Khayyam will then be presenting the work group insights, recommendations, and anticipated next steps in the process. The staff direction, in short, required four things. It required the arts, culture, and creative economy to, one, convene the work group, which was articulated in the direction, create an economic investment summary of the city's arts programming and work, 3, conduct a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis of our arts work, and 4, come forward with a set of insights and recommendations and simply present them to council. In summary, we were told to do an internal audit of our arts capacity. The work group was comprised of the following people that you see on the slide in front of you. There was a subcommittee of staff comprised of the city coordinator's office, our HR facilitator, Vince Theron, and Public Works, with important contributions from CPED. The work group you see here met a total of 3 times. During the first meeting, the group identified generally the issues the city is facing in regards to its arts capacity and identified the scope of deliverables. The second meeting consisted of the actual SWOT analysis, and the third meeting was a review and prioritization of those recommendations. The subcommittee of staff met a total of 3 times, with countless hours of work in between. The small group reviewed and prepared all documentation that had been drafted and compiled in preparation of our larger group meeting. And here is an example of our work plan that we produced at the outset. As I indicated, as part of the first meeting, the work group as a whole identified the perceived issues. We needed to understand the pool of arts work and investment, the what we do. And then are we using those resources ideally? And for all intents and purposes, our arts work is less coordinated than it seemingly needs to be, so we needed to analyze how we do it. And third, we had to figure out and organize, we had to figure out how do we organize our body of work so the public can easily engage with us, and are we fully promoting our reputation, which is our value proposition, which is how we communicate and promote it. We also discussed specifically our deliverables. which is our main deliverable, which is included on the slide. But we also had some subcomponents of those deliverables. One, organizational structure. We were to decide whether art should be housed within its current structure or if something should be changed. We were also told to recommend high-level enhancements, the process portion of it. And we were also told to look at the full body of work and decipher which departments and divisions did what, the services end of the deliverable. Oh, let me go back. These articulated issues and deliverables were then circulated to the full worker group. They were circulated for editing and final approval before we went on to the SWOT analysis. So what you see in front of you is a compilation of the city's arts economic investments. We have obviously a greater spreadsheet that the work group saw, but this is a distilled version of it. And it's an attempt to capture all of the investments across the enterprise at the department and division levels through our statutory arts investment, general funding, and grants. This document was circulated in person to all the participating council members and the mayor's representative. It was also circulated via email to all the other work group participants for their input, their analysis, and their consideration before we went into the SWOT analysis. I'd just like to point out a couple of things about this slide. If you look at the first two rows where it says CPED and coordinator, those programs are programs that are tailored to arts and culture. Now, if you look at the four bottom rows where it says CPED, coordinator, health, and public works, those programs utilize arts and culture, but the programs aren't specifically tailored to that sector. So what this kind of tells us to a certain extent is that art is everywhere within the enterprise, and it's utilized throughout the enterprise, but it's decentralized, it's fragmented, and it's siloed. The large group then went through the SWOT analysis, and while we have much more detailed feedback and that was gained and actually documented, what you see here are some of the highlights that we came up with. We identified that the city has a strong arts core. We have a great reputation internationally and nationally. We have organizations, and particular individuals and organizations have a name and reputation inside the United States and outside the United States. We have a lot of opportunities, one of them being that we have, as a municipality, an opportunity for unique funding sources and partnerships. We also identified some weaknesses that we have going on. Some of our investments are overly focused in certain geographical areas. The rest of our investments are overly diffused, as is our work, and as is our promotion of that work. And we also identified some threats. We have neighborhood arts organizations that are struggling with decline of the private funding. We also have our city service model to the creative sector is too decentralized, which then basically makes us too reactive to the sector and not as proactive as it possibly could be. So now I will turn over the latter part of the presentation to Gulgun to discuss the insights and recommendations that were born out of our process.
Thank you, Danielle. Madam Chair, Council President, Council members. My name is Gulgun Kaim. I am the Director of Arts, Culture and the Creative Economy. I will be presenting on the top recommendations created by the work group. The recommendations are organized in order of priority as defined by the group, and I will also talk in more detail about the SWOT analysis and the insights it provided. The work group's number one recommendation addresses the organization of arts and cultural work within the city's enterprise and recommends consolidating arts and cultural programs to create a new standalone department or division. The purpose here is to provide easier oversight and accountability for all of the city's arts and culture related programs and investments. By centralizing our work, the enterprise is making a strong statement and demonstrably committing to the creative sector by elevating and valuing it. This recommendation acknowledges and leverages the city's existing strengths in the power, size, and scope of our creative sector. As noted in past economic research, Minneapolis performs very well against the national average in employment, pay, and concentration of our arts community. We also outperform other industries in revenue generations, such as sports, for example. In fact, Minneapolis for-profit creative sector delivers 9 times the revenues of our for-profit sports. By centralizing our arts and culture work, we also address some of our weaknesses, as attention can be paid to where and how we spend public dollars. Concentration allows for better legibility, accountability, and strategic management of our work. Investments will be more strategic and spread out into the city's geography and managed more consistently. We can also pay attention to sustainability in our investments by committing over longer periods of time than other types of institutions. The opportunities provided by centralizing our work include allowing for better controls on reducing racial disparities in pay and employment that currently exist within the creative sector. It also gives us the opportunity to monitor and better manage our existing and future investments and partnerships. Centralization of our work addresses the threats surfaced by the Arts and Culture Work Group, as it allows for both internal and external clarity to the city's existing creative sector program and investments. Our second recommendation is focused on establishing a dedicated revenue stream for arts and cultural investment that comes from outside of the general fund. The work group noted that stable revenue streams provide stable and reliable community investment. The city has an advantage in that as a municipal government, we are able to access sources of funding that are not available to other organizations. With this recommendation, we also address our weaknesses by dedicating revenues to consistent and sustainable investment. We can move to address threats to organizations that are in financial danger more effectively and efficiently, and also work proactively to create and grow stronger financial structures where they are needed through investment in business development services specifically tailored for growth and stabilization. Recommendation number 3 brings me to the areas of new programming prioritized by the work group. Recommendation 3 addresses Minneapolis's neighborhood and arts enterprise support. This recommendation goes beyond the city's core to attend to the needs of surrounding neighborhoods and those creative enterprises that anchor these parts of the city. It notes that investment needs to happen in all neighborhoods, as they are also cultural destinations. Arts and cultural enterprises are also businesses that need development services, and a focus on anti-displacement programming is needed as increasing land values threaten more vulnerable arts and cultural communities. As I have already noted, our strength lies in the fact that we are a city of neighborhoods. Research as well as personal experience demonstrates that excellent arts and culture organizations, activities, and events can be found all over Minneapolis. Acknowledging these facts, recommendation number 3 invests in neighborhood arts and cultural infrastructure. It provides concentrated business services and much needed skills training for arts and cultural enterprises as well as individuals, and these investments also serve to protect our other investments in cultural buildings. An opportunity also exists for the city to address racial disparities in pay and employment among creative workers. To be clear, we're talking about investment in all neighborhoods. That said, the work group also wished to align our future cultural district work with this particular recommendation area. Our final recommendation focuses our efforts more intentionally on promoting and marketing our arts and culture sector. The work group sees an opportunity to create a better, more centralized partnership with Minneapolis, but not to the exclusion of other partnership options. This would include promoting the city as the premier arts and cultural destination that we know it already is. We have obvious strengths in our sector that I've already discussed, but of course, we also have significant star power in artists such as Prince, Lizzo, Dylan, Louise Erdrich, August Wilson, Gordon Parks, and many, many more who have chosen to make a life and a living in our city. This recommendation leverages the full weight of the story that Minneapolis has to tell about our past and present, and it demonstrates the cultural richness and diversity of our creative community. We have the opportunity to tell the world about the strong arts and culture center that we already are, and in so doing, we can also market cultural events, festivals, organizations to visitors and locals alike, to help our sector access new markets. Finally, by showcasing our arts and cultural community, the city enterprise also demonstrates how valuable it is to Minneapolis's economy and livability. So this ends my presentation on the work group's top 4 recommendations, and now on to next steps. As it currently stands, the work group will continue to convene. We will create a tactical plan that includes budget and timeline on how to execute on these recommendations, and finally present a final proposal for council approval in 2020. Thank you very much. I am happy to stand for questions along with my colleague, should you have any.
Thank you, Ms. Kayam. And before I open it up to questions from my colleagues, I do want to apologize publicly to Ms. Shelton Walczak for butchering your name. I also want to acknowledge that we have been joined by Council President Bender as well as Councilmember Goodman, and would open the floor for questions or comments from my colleagues. Are there any? Oh, Mr. Fletcher. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, I think there's this both interesting idea of really wanting to invest in every neighborhood and see arts as something that goes everywhere, but also relate to the arts organizations as they currently exist. We've been very intentional over the last couple of decades of concentrating a lot of that in the Northeast Arts District in an intentional way. So how does this relate to the Northeast Arts District? How do you see the work moving forward, sort of taking advantage of the ways that we've been successful in creating a district in a sense of identity and purpose there around the arts, especially as we have conversations about the other cultural districts and the idea of sort of trying to invest across the rest of the city?
Thank you, Council Member. As it relates to cultural districts, we are not really talking about that specifically in this work. I mean, while we did mention that the investments need to align with our current policies, I can't speak to what those will look like, as I'm not leading that work. So in terms of the cultural districts piece, I will not be able to answer that. But as we've already mentioned, by looking at our neighborhoods, because there are neighborhoods, as you mentioned, Northeast, which already have very functional and very successful arts communities. So there, as I mentioned at the very last recommendation, it's about leveraging what already exists. We need to be more intentional about telling that story to visitors, making it more legible and easy to access. And I would argue that there are interesting and excellent organizations all over the city. Our recent mapping work with the Creative Index demonstrated the diversity and spread of what we have. So That's my sort of very obvious response. There's obviously a lot more detail in the work that we need to do, and I don't feel like we can go into those details at the moment, but I hope that answers your question.
It does. I'll just sort of editorialize that I think the word culture is doing a lot of different work in a lot of different parts of the city right now, and I think we actually probably should be a little bit careful about creating an arts and culture division in the same year that we're creating cultural districts,
Understood.
and they mean very different things.
Of course. Yes,
and
thank you for
I think it is going to
correcting me.
create some
Yes.
confusion or some sense of an overlap of purpose that might not be there. So
Yes.
it's worth us thinking about how do we
Right.
talk about these things so that people understand what we mean.
Indeed, and of course, Northeast is a cultural district designated as such through our previous work.
But it is not one of the cultural districts being proposed as a part of the cultural district policy.
Oh dear,
Hence the
we're
confusion.
getting into semantics. Thank you.
Wow, your editorial is very well noted and will hopefully inform our process moving forward.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and that what we're really doing right here is getting some information and then teeing up a staff direction to keep the work going. I'm just wondering if I could hear a little bit more about how the Arts Commission has been involved in this so far, and have they signed off on all the recommendations essentially, or what's their role in it?
I'll be presenting to the Arts Commission this evening, so they have a meeting, and I'll be presenting the same presentation. So that's the answer. I'll know once that presentation happens.
I appreciate that. Has there been an Arts Commissioner on the work group at all?
No, there was a decision not to bring the Arts Commission into the work, as it was an internal audit.
Okay, and I would say as this moves forward and progresses, it's going to be important to find ways to bring in more community activists, including or artists or people who have an interest in it, because this is going to clearly be something people are potentially very excited about or concerned about and want to be engaged in, and this commissioners I'm sure would as well. And when we talk about aligning things better in the department, I mean the whole area of public art and what the commission has done and then what the coordinator's office has worked on have seemed like sometimes they're at arm's length, and I think there's great potential to in the recommendations, there's a lot of great potential for really good things to happen, but I think we just are going to need to be careful and thoughtful and inclusive about it. And if you want to share some thoughts on that, that's fine.
I wanted to reiterate that the staff direction was more internally focused, but when we were going through the SWOT analysis and discussing the issues and deliverables, I mean, part of it is we have a group of staff who are very well informed and have a lot of touch points with stakeholders. That's not to say that we substitute our voice for them, but when we were discussing things, we had Gulgoon and Mary and others who could speak to what they were hearing from stakeholders over their periods of time with working with our arts community and how they view what we're doing. And so part of that, so those insights based on their conversations was brought into it. So it wasn't as if it was completely devoid of the conversation. We were not only talking about what we saw internally as staff, but what we were hearing externally from people. So I just wanted to bring that up. But I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people are going to be interested in having that input from them. It will be very important as we continue to move forward.
And I can appreciate that. I mean, it's been very internal, and now also I think the next work group is also I don't know if we're reconstituting a new work group or it's just the same folks who are going to be involved, but it's called out in the staff direction. That looks like it's very internal facing too. So I guess my point is we might, let's be thoughtful about it. Right now, as you're coming out, this is public now. At least we've heard these couple pages, and the strengths and weaknesses, and that kind of is public, and the commission's going to hear about it. So I think finding a good way to do that, whether it's after April 30th or between now and April 30th of next year when the other report comes, I think will be important and it'll be helpful. So,
Thank you, Councilmember.
I would just add that myself and Councilmember Ellison, who have been involved in this work, are practicing artists and certainly engaged in the community as well, but that does not replace the valuable insights from our community members. So we do need to figure out ways to incorporate those voices as well. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? With that, I move approval of item number 1, which includes receiving and filing the report and the direction to staff regarding the future of the work group. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. And that item carries. Thanks to all the staff who have been involved in this work, as well as my colleagues who have been really working hard to bring this work to this point. And to your point, Councilmember Fletcher, the sort of frequent use of the word culture is something that we need to be very cognizant of and really delineating what we are intending that term to mean. Yeah. Thank you. So the only other additional business before us today is the receipt of reports from the standing committees on matters to be considered by the full council at our regular meeting this coming Friday. And we'll start with the Economic Development and Regulatory Service Committee report given by Chair Goodman.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice President. We have 8 items on our agenda, although it looks like we have a lot more. Item number 1 is a license approval, and item number 2 is a bond issuance. Item number 3, there are many parts to that, 15 in fact. This has to do with special assessments relating to nuisance conditions. So this is kind of the consolidated list of nuisance conditions, and we're happy that only one person came to the public hearing and was concerned about those assessments, and we directed them to staff. So then we will move on to the liquor license approvals, the liquor license renewals, gambling license renewals, license settlement conference recommendations, and a contract amendment with Hennepin County. With that, that's our agenda.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Are there any questions? Councilmember Gordon? Seeing no questions, then we will move to the next committee report given by, the next committee report is the Elections and Rules Committee, and that would be presented by Chair Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Elections and Rules Committee does not have any items to forward to the full council meeting, but we did receive and file a report about plans for how the city plans to conduct the upcoming primary and presidential primary. So we got a really great report on that. I think the short of it is that it's going to cost us some money, and that we've planned for that, and that Minneapolis really is good at voting. You could say we have a culture of voting here in this city. Just to riff on all the talk about culture. Anyway, so that's the report. Nothing to forward to this Friday.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, for that moment of levity. And our next committee, are there any questions? No questions? Next committee report is the Enterprise Committee, and in light of Chair... I'm sorry? Oh, yes. It's super exciting, and that report will be presented by Councilmember Goodman.
The person most excited about being on this committee will give the report. So there's only one item that's coming out of the committee this month, and that is an agreement with LexisNexis Holdings for exchange of information. This is authorizing a non-disclosure agreement with them to exchange information related to record search database for criminal investigations. There were lots of important things discussed, but this was the only item that came out of the committee. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman, for your exuberance and
Thank you for taking me off of it. So now,
and excitement.
Joy. Council structure.
All right. The next committee report, does anyone have any questions about the LexisNexis memorandum? No? The next committee report is the Housing Policy and Development Committee, given by Chair Gordon.
Thank you very much, Vice President Jenkins. The Housing Policy and Development Committee is bringing forward 8 items. It was actually one of our bigger meetings of the year in terms of the awards from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and tax credits. The first 2 items are land sales. One is at 914 19th Avenue Northeast, and this is actually an interesting project because we're going to be getting a passive house or a highly efficient house out of this. And second one is another land sale. That's at 4105 12th Avenue South. Third item is for giving some funding, $172,000 for the Harriet Tubman Center Affordable Housing Loan Forgiveness Program. The fourth and fifth item both have to do with home ownership. The first is authorizing contracts with Build Wealth and with Neighbor Works Home Partners to support our Home Ownership Minneapolis program. And the fifth item is approving contracts for culturally specific capacity building to support home ownership. Sixth item is preliminary approval of our 2020 9% low-income housing tax credits. That's to 3 projects. And the seventh item is our 2019 Affordable Housing Trust Fund Awards. And there's actually 15 different actions associated with that for about 12 different projects, I believe. And the last item is a memorandum of understanding with Hennepin County related to managing and supporting the Office to End Homelessness. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, the next committee report will be the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee report, given again by the Vice Chair, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to give this report as well. There's 10 items that are coming forward from the Peace Committee. The first is passage of an ordinance that would ban conversion therapy in the city of Minneapolis, making us the first city in the state to do so. The second item is an ordinance relating to Green to Go. I'm just making some small amendments to that. Third item is passage of an ordinance that would regulate single-use carry-out bags. Fourth item is approving appointments to the Transgender Equity Council. Fifth item is accepting a grant from the Public Housing Authority to develop a health dashboard for high-rise residents. Sixth item is also accepting a grant. This is from the Department of Health, and this is to implement a culturally appropriate immunization outreach program. Seventh item is authorizing the city to enter into a master contract with the Department of Health for health services. Eighth items, authorizing community solar garden agreements. Ninth items, authorizing a contract with Practicum. And this is an agreement with Bethel University School of Nursing for internship experiences. And the 10th item is passage of a resolution reaffirming our support and interest in becoming a child-friendly city with UNICEF, and we would be the first city in the nation to do that. I'm happy to stand for any questions on any of those items.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? You know, I would comment that this is a pretty historic committee report. The conversion therapy, the plastic bag fees, many things that are really going to improve quality of life and health and safety for Minneapolis residents. So I'm really excited about this coming Friday, being able to pass that. Our next committee report.
I'll just make one more note. Related to the carry-out bags, I'm working on a small staff direction to provide resources and support for residents to help implement this, and so that staff will be working on kind of an education and outreach plan. And that's just a heads up. Actually, the Council Vice President and I are working on that together. Thanks.
Thank you again, Councilmember Gordon. The next committee report then is the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee, and that report will be given by its Vice Chair, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins. The Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee is bringing forward 5 items for consideration on Friday. The first is a DWI court grant for police liaison and DWI defendant monitoring services. The items 2 and 3 are mutual aid agreements with Ramsey and Anoka County, respectively. Item 4 is the Police Conduct Review Panel appointments, and item 5 is the Police Conduct Oversight Commission appointments. I'll just note how important the accountability coming out of the Police Conduct Review and Police Conduct Oversight Commission are to the culture change that Chief Arredondo is attempting to lead us through. So I want to appreciate their service.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. And there, once again, is that word culture. Are there any questions? Any questions? Seeing none, the next committee report is the Transportation and Public Works Committee report, given again by Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you again, Council Vice President Jenkins. Transportation and Public Works Committee is bringing forward 9 items on Friday. Item number 1 is the Hoyer Heights residential street reconstruction. Item number 2 is capital project closeouts and appropriation with the city's capital project enterprise and grant funds. Item number 3 is the RFP for parking meter equipment and management system. Item number 4 is a request for proposals for planning and engineering services for Hennepin Avenue street reconstruction project. Item number 5 is a mutual aid agreement with other public works agencies for training, preparation, and response to natural and man-made disasters. Item number 6 is cost participation with Hennepin County for the North Loop reconstruction project. Item number 7 is the Southwest Wyndham residential street reconstruction. Item number 8 is contract amendments with custom products and services for sidewalk and parking lot snow clearing, removal, and ice control services for special service districts. And item number 9 is a contract with Meyer Contracting for Hennepin Avenue water main replacement project. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. Are there any questions? Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not pertinent to any specific item on the agenda, but I did want to mention for those who didn't get a chance to kind of get caught up on what happened at the Board of Estimate and Taxation, which doesn't report here through this committee because it's a separate entity, of course, where the city is represented by the mayor, myself, and Councilmember Warsami, along with the president of the park board and 2 independently elected members. We had a little discussion about our capital program that I just wanted to let council members know in case you want to follow up with any questions. So we delayed the reissuance of some bond funds that was intended to shift savings from some projects to other projects in order to complete them in our capital program in Public Works. And so that was delayed one cycle after President Bourne from the park board raised some questions about procedure related to issuing debt or sort of reassigning debt, which has been a standard practice at the Board of Estimate and Taxation for a long time. So our city attorneys and the park board, I think staff are working together to answer some of those technical questions. I expect at the next BET meeting for those projects to be approved and that debt to be issued so that those projects can be completed. Not reissued, but reallocated. But I wanted to raise that issue just so council members knew that discussion was happening.
Any questions for Council President Bender? Seeing none, we will move to our next standing committee report, which is the Ways and Means Committee, given by its chair, Councilmember Warsami.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Ways and Means Committee brings 12 items. Item number 1 and 2 are gift acceptances, and item number 3 is a bid for the elevator and escalator maintenance at the Minneapolis Convention Center. Item numbers 4 to 12 are basically contract amendments for various projects for the public service building project. And any questions?
Thank you, Councilmember Warsami. Any questions? The next committee report then will be the Zoning and Planning Committee, given by Chair Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Council Vice President. The Zoning and Planning Committee will bring forward 3 items for approval on Friday. The first is the approval of alley and easement vacation for the Metropolitan Council for property located at 600, 608, 612 8th Avenue North, as well as 550 10th Avenue North, as well as 1000, 1010 Lendale Avenue North, and 800 through 812 North 7th Street, as well as 804 7th and a half Avenue North. The second is the approval of a rezoning and alley vacation at 817, 819, 821, 825 West Broadway Avenue, as well as 1828, 1830, 1832, 1836, and 1838 Bryant Avenue North. And the final is the passage of an ordinance for intentional communities and cluster developments. And I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Schrader. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, the next committee report is the Executive Committee, and that report will be given by the Vice Chair and President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 2 items to forward. The first is the reappointment of the Director of Public Works, which was forwarded by the Executive Committee. And then the second is on creating a new appointed position in the Finance Department, which is Director of Investments and Debt Management. Again, that would go through, if approved, to the Ways and Means Committee. I do want to comment just briefly on the director appointments. So in addition to item 1, we also, again, had the Director of City Planning and Economic Development in front of us. We postponed that item 1 more cycle to allow the council members who are chairs of the committee, along with the council vice president, to complete the director's review. So we did have time, I think, for the executive committee members to meet with the public works director. We had to delay this item 1 cycle in order to accomplish that, but that was able to happen. So this one will be forwarded. The CPAD director has been delayed for 1 more cycle to allow those conversations with council members to happen before the executive committee acts. And for each of these, as the mayor nominates department directors and they come through the council for approval, I'm working with the clerk's office to make sure that we're using the same process to set the public hearings for each director, so there isn't variation between the process that we're using to set the hearing. So that will come to the council, and then it will be referred to the proper committee for the public hearing to be set. So we'll look forward to each of those coming forward.
Thank you, President Bender. Are there any questions or comments? Colleagues, before we adjourn the meeting, I do want to just ask for your indulgence, as today is November 20th, the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the fact that as a transgender member of this body and chairing a committee on this day, to ask for a brief moment of silence, but also to acknowledge that in light of the 22 murders of transgender individuals, primarily Black transgender women throughout the country, the I-35W bridge as well as the Lowry Avenue Bridge will both be lit in the transgender flag colors this evening at dusk. So please join me in a brief moment of silence. Thank you so much, colleagues, and seeing that there is no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned.